Hi, Chuck Trawick of Infotronics here again. This is now part 3 of our series on how to create SharePoint 2013 designer workflows. So here I am on my host machine. I'm going to go back to the virtual machine we were running in, and I'm going to stop this workflow we did previously. I'm going to, just to be clean, bring it up again in SharePoint Designer 2013. I'm going to open the event site that we had from before. I'm going to go over here on my navigation pane, and this time I'm going to open the pre-existing workflow that we had previously done. And I want to show you a couple of things on this screen here. Over here, these are like workflow parameters. This is a new feature right here. We can automatically update the workflow status. There's a whole new section of monitoring and management tool sets inside of Designer 13. And it's going to put our task in this list and our history in this list. And for our case here, we want the workflow to be started manually. But we could enable it to start automatically when something is created or when something is edited or changed. So when the workflow runs, the stages that we have, it will show us those stages as it runs. So I'm going to go and open the workflow up, and you will see that we've done a couple of additional things here. Now this is the same thing we did before, right? This is the template or wizard that we used for setting up the approval workflow, and this is a wizard, has the same options as we had previously, only we did something a little different here on the email. And in order to look something up, if we go over here and look at the site, you will see that in this view we have an ID column. Every item in SharePoint has a unique ID, and so we're going to use this ID to look something up so we can insert it into the email a little further on. So down later on in the workflow, when we send an approval to Kate Trawick, we actually look these items up using that ID, and we'll get to that in a second. So up here in the beginning stage of the workflow where we said request approval, we set up a memory variable called MID, and we get that from the current item, the ID of it. We then did the same wizard for creating a task as we did before. We then check the outcome, and if it's approved, we go to approved. If it's not, we go to rejected. In approved, we could do some additional logic here, but we didn't. And we went straight to the weather stage. Now, I want to spend a little time here on this. And you'll see that here is one of the new capabilities we referenced at the beginning of this series. You'll see that we are calling a web service, and we're supplying parameters to this. And what this allows us to do is there's all kinds of dissimilar systems around the planet. Probably on most people's networks there are applications that do not speak to each other formally. They don't have drivers or interfaces. So a web service is a way to create an interface from one system to another. And each one of those web services has something called an endpoint and an authentication method. So in this case here, we came in and we set up an account at World Weather Online, and you'll see that we passed through some parameters here. Let's bring this up so you can see it. And this is the URL to where the weather service is, and the parameters we passed through were the location. We wanted to get our answer back in something called JSON. And that stands for JavaScript Object Notation, and it's just a way to get data back. I'll show you that in a minute. How many days we wanted, and this is our key that was created for our account. So if we come down here and we bring up that JSON viewer, I'm going to go back into Designer, and I'm going to grab this URL like so. And in our browser, I'm going to go to that address. And I'm going to open that. And let's bring up the viewer. So we downloaded this weather file previously. So I'm going to bring up this program here, and I'm going to open that file just to show you what the data looks like. And we put it in this file here called weather. And you'll see that we passed in a request for weather for a location for 5 days. And it returned it to us in this list, and you'll see that it had a date, precipitation, max temp, min temp. You'll see that it has wind direction, wind speed, and it did that for 5 days. This is a free download that you can get. This happens to be one of the better ones. So over here in SharePoint Designer, that's what this does. This goes out and asks for that data. And when it comes back, that's using an HTTP GET method. It's going to put it into a dictionary object that we call WResponse, and that was made. Remember we talked about what a dictionary is? A dictionary is a set of data that we can retrieve. And so we got all these back, and it populated them. Then we set up another email string for a table, an HTML table. And if we go look at that, we just created a string. We said create a table and create a table row. And then we said, okay, we know we're going to have n numbers of these sets of data. So let's create an index and start it at 0. And then once we did that, we needed to create a header so people could read this. So we said the table detail in row 1 is date, then max temperature, min temperature, precipitation, wind speed, wind direction. We ended that table detail. And then we said we want this loop to run 5 times because we're getting 5 days. Now right here, remember we talked about creating custom actions? Before this presentation, I didn't have time to do this, but we will. We're going to attempt to create a custom add-in action into Designer. Just like you see this call right here that has several parameters, we're going to try to create one that gives you an option to create a URL and a list name and returns the number of records in a list. So imagine right here in this loop that if I had a list out there with, let's say, an indeterminate number of task items and I wanted to process all of them for something, instead of having this run n numbers of times, you can see I can loop with a condition, or when I create this loop, I could put the count number in a variable like that. And the condition could be loop while something is true, and inside the loop when I hit the number, I could change that variable to false. So what we did 5 times in this loop is we created a new row, and in that row we went out and we retrieved from this, we did this data element, and you'll see that we use the index variable there to get the date from our dictionary object, and we put the answer into temp string. Then we took and put that into our table, our email table, and we did that for each one of these. There's max temperature. We put max temperature also into the table with a temp string. Then the next thing we did was we put in, oops, missed a spot there. We put in min temperature, and then we came through and put that in our email table. We made it a new table detail. We're adding to the table here. As you'll see, that's the previous variable. We looked it up using this command here. We grabbed the table, and we added this to it, so it's appending to that string. Then we did the same thing for precipitation, added precipitation to our table. Then we did the same thing for wind speed. We added wind speed to our table. Then we did the same thing for wind direction. We added that to our table. And when we were finished with our table, at the end we ended the table row. So we should end up with a header that lists those columns, 5 days, giving us those variables in a nicely formatted table. Then you'll see we incremented index +1. So every time we say the next time through, the first time through, when we did this right here, index is 0. So it's the first entry that you saw in that JSON list. The second would be 1, and so on. And we're going to go through this 5 times. Then outside of that loop, we come in and change our table. We finish the row. We finish the table. Okay, so then, because this is in a stage, at the end of the stage, we said go to send mail. And to send mail, we're going to do something else. We're going to create another table. And here's it. We could have done this in the previous release, by the way. We set up a Bing Virtual Earth service. We created a new table here with a row and then a detail in it. And then we created an image tag. And in that image tag, we put in this URL for driving route. And you'll see that we inserted this variable here from our list for the home address to the location address. And then we pass through our key, because we set up a service and account over there. Then we closed out that detail in the table. Okay, make sense? So in order to make this work, we're going to save this. And this is now faster than it was before. And we're going to publish it. Now in our situation, we would, in the real world, we would do this quite a bit differently. Instead of having, like you saw here, all these different icons for 3 different events, we'd have one event. And we'd have a list, a drop-down list for you to pick it, and then the workflow would be coded to change based on that event. But in this case here, just to illustrate this, we're going to come into the event list. I'm going to drop down the context menu. Our workflow runs manually. So I'm going to pick our workflow list. There's our event workflow 2. And so it has started the workflow. And let's see here, I might have to refresh this for a minute or two. Now you see that right there? Request approval. Now what really happened was back in the workflow, when we set the workflow parameters up over here, that's what this is. By doing that, we can monitor this through the process. Now I'm going to pop out of my virtual machine and I'm going to bring up my local email account. And I should have a workflow in here, an email, and there's an email that came to me. I'm the first approver, and in this case there's only one. So I'm going to open this up. And now it gives me a little bit of information about the workflow, and I'm going to click on the Plane 1 Tour, which was the title of our task. And now you see it gives us some information. Based on the permission I have, I'm going to edit the item, and I'm going to review this, and this could be obviously a lot more complex than we have here, and I'm going to approve it. And you'll see that I have a list of things here we used. So now I'm going to go back to the virtual machine. I'm going to bring up this email client. And there is the email that came in. And if I open this up, you'll see that what we did when we send the email over to the user, remember we talked about how we trapped the email item number? So right here we said your event. So we went in the current item and we got the name title from it. Scheduled on the current date of event. We inserted all of that into the email. Then we said, there's that email table, the projected weather. Then we have a location map and we have a route map. So if I go back to the email, there's 5 days of data, max, min, estimated temperatures, precipitation, wind speed and direction. There's the map for the location. And we should be able to download the pictures. And there's a driving direction route. So we started off with a very simple layout, a process layout in Visio 2013 that a non-technical person could do that's more familiar with the process than IT professionals would be. That was shared with IT professionals, and these commands were added, right, to go out and get data from web services. Then we basically populated these wizards, attached it to the list, and published it. So this concludes this series on these workflows.